Hey everybody, welcome to the first ever episode of I Herd Dat. This is the unofficial Herd Ombudsman show. So I love Colin Cowherd. I've been listening to him ever since he went national and ESPN way back when. I think I actually heard his first show. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take his takes because I think as he gets older, he's starting to get a little bit into old guy complaining about, the cleanliness of a deli. He's just complaining a little bit too much these days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take his takes, many of which I still think are great. And I'm going to rate them between Vintage Herd, which means they're the thumbs up, or Coastal Colin, which is a thumbs down. Now, Vintage Herd, he looks at things a little different way. I like his takes for the most part. I don't view him as a contrarian. I view him as a thinker. Coastal Colin gets a little bit, in my opinion, lazy with his analysis. Coastal Colin, name drops. He talks about all the GMs he hangs out with. For some reason, he likes professional wrestling when he hated it at the other place. Let's be real about this. And yeah, he eats tofu sushi. And pays a lot of money for that tofu sushi, and look, he's living the lifestyle, and I don't blame him. I don't begrudge him of that. Listen, if I could live in Southern California and be as wealthy and successful as he is, hey, that's the dream, right? So no hate, but I do think that he needs a little bit of checks and balances because I don't think he has enough of that on the show. So this week I'm talking about Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, okay? Now, if you saw, you've been keeping track earlier in the week, I think the first time he mentioned Joe Burrow with respect to the Bengals and the number one pick, he showed a clip of Burrow who kind of had this long meandering, this is a process, this is long, are they going to draft me, are they not? If they do, maybe I have a little bit of leverage, yada, yada, yada. Now, what Herd said the first day that this news kind of dropped was that Burrow, he's going to try to use his leverage and get out of Cincinnati. And Cincinnati is kind of a graveyard for quarterbacks. Carson Palmer famously didn't do so well there. And by the way, Jordan Palmer, Carson's brother, who also was in that Bengals organization, is his kind of draft prep quarterback coach, which is an interesting angle. And Herd says, look, this is a real thing. He's not going to want to go there. He's going to try to force a trade a la Eli Manning back when the then San Diego Chargers had the first pick, and he'll use that leverage. Now, the second day, and I didn't think that was a great take. Now, I thought that certainly Burrow would use that leverage or would try to use that leverage, but there was something that that I thought Herd was missing. The second day, I think he cleaned it up, and he was showing takes of Carson Palmer basically saying, "Hey, look, I had to, this organization, meaning the Bengals, is consistently bad with their quarterbacks. I had to basically retire just because I didn't want to play there anymore." And you remember Carson Palmer, I think, was later traded to the Oakland Raiders, and then ended up on the Arizona Cardinals. They won a nice little run there with Bruce Arians as the head coach, or with Bruce Arians as head coach. Now, Solomon Wilcox came out and he said, "Look, I saw what Carson Palmer went through in Cincinnati." Solomon Wilcox, of course, a favored Bengals alum. He said, they're not great at developing quarterbacks. They have famously the worst, or at least the smallest scouting department in the NFL. They make questionable decisions, I think, in the front office. Players over the course of my adult life have hated being there and tried to get their way out. I remember Corey Dillon, certainly Carson Palmer, who I mentioned, Chad Johnson. I mean, there are guys that just want to get out of there when they're stars. Now, when they hired the Bengals, when they hired Marvin Lewis, first of all, brought stability to that organization and a little bit of gravitas. It helped that they had Andy Dalton, a stable force at the quarterback position. Whether or not you think he's an all-pro or worth the money that he got or whatever, that's another argument for another day. He did bring stability, especially at that quarterback position, and you got to admit that he had a better career there than Carson Palmer did. Marvin Lewis also brought computers. Yes, computers to the Cincinnati Bengals. Seriously, computers. They didn't have computers in the offices before Marvin Lewis went there. Look, it's not a great organization, all right? I'm sorry, Bengals fans. I have love for the city of Cincinnati, but it's true, okay? So flash forward to what I was saying before. I think Herd was missing something, and I think what he was missing was how stubborn Mike Brown, the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals, is. The Cincinnati Bengals have the first pick. If they think that Burrow is the best player on the board at that point, if they think they need that quarterback and Burrow's the guy, and by the way, I agree with that from what I've seen in college football, I think he's definitely the guy, they're drafting him. And Mike Brown will use that first-round pick, and he will basically make Burrow sit out a year. Now, Burrow could do the thing where he doesn't sign his rookie contract and yada, yada, yada. Mike Brown is drafting Joe Burrow. If the Bengals organization decide that that's it, they'll draft him, and they'll make him sit out a year if he doesn't want to play seriously. He made Carson Palmer do that before trading him. They will do that. So I think Herd, he mentioned and he name dropped a little bit of Coastal Colin now. A little bit of Coastal Colin. He was talking about the dinner he went out to with the GM and how he sat in traffic and all that stuff. Hey, look, no shade at Colin on that one, but the GM said, hey, the Bengals are going to fight for Joe Burrow. You can't look. Mike Brown comes from a different generation. Okay, he's old, angry man. He's old, angry white guy, right? He is going to kick and scream, and he is going to make it as painful as Joe Burrow, for Joe Burrow as possible. If Joe Burrow tries to, I guess, use some leverage to get out of there. Now, it is possible that the Bengals and Zach Taylor and the organization, they look at the tape and they're like, you know what, even with the hip injury, we'll take Tua. If that's the case, we might see a situation where the Bengals draft Joe Burrow, trade down with another team, whether it's Detroit, Miami, which I don't really buy so much for reasons I'll take care of in another video, or any other team, and then just try to gouge him in a trade and then get the guy that they want. That's possible. But like I said, if Zimmer, I apologize, if Mike Brown decides that Joe Burrow is the guy, the Bengals are drafting him, Joe Burrow will be a Bengal. Joe Burrow will hold out for a long time, and then I think he'll take the money because, hey, it's a lot of money. And it's easier to get that money, I think, rather than go back in a redraft situation, which, frankly, depending on the collective bargaining agreement, and especially the new one that's being negotiated at this point, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? So there you go. There's my take, my judgment over the full course of the week. I was ready to go Coastal Colin. I was ready to call this a Coastal Colin take, but he cleaned it up the second day. I'm going with Vintage Colin. This was an episode of I Heard That. Check back. I am going to be the unofficial Colin Cowherd ombudsman. And yeah, check back because he has some polarizing takes, and I'll either agree or disagree. We'll see what happens. Thanks, everyone.